The reading of God's Word this morning is from the Old Testament, the book of Leviticus. I shall read from chapter 19, verses 9 and 10 of the New International Version. When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not go over your vineyard a second time, or pick up the grapes that have fallen. Leave them for the poor and the foreigner. I am the Lord your God. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
So today is likely to be my last sermon with you all as a staff member, although I do hope to be back. So because of that, I was really thinking, what is it that I feel like I should say? And ultimately, I put a lot of pressure on myself, like these are last words, these need to be good words. So I went round and round. I thought, well, maybe I just need to preach the core message that Jesus Christ loved you enough to die and suffer on the cross and was resurrected because he loved you that much. And then I thought, well, maybe I need to preach instead that no matter what happens in your life, no matter what you do or don't do, nothing around you can ever change the fact that your core identity of who you are is in Jesus Christ, as being a son or daughter of God, and nothing can change that. And I thought, well, maybe that should be the sermon. But as I was on vacation a few weeks ago, I kept coming back to this idea which we're going to explore today, and it just wouldn't go away. So we're going to go with that one. Before I go there, though, I think that I should share a brief story with you. This is actually the second time that my family and I have lived in Florida. I grew up in Ohio, and I said I would never, ever, ever live in Kentucky. But the last time we were in Florida, I decided it was time for me to go to seminary, and I decided I'd go to Asbury Theological Seminary, and they have Orlando campus and a Kentucky campus. The Kentucky campus is the main campus. Orlando is more of a commuter. And I wanted to be involved in more of the main campus things that were going on. So sure enough, we were moving to Kentucky. So the moral of the story is don't ever say you won't do something, because you will. But in this move, when we decided to move there, we were 3 weeks out from moving, and we still had no place to live. And Wilmore is not a very large place if you've ever been there. There are limited housing options. They had just built new student housing, but the waiting list was forever long. We weren't going to make that. So I was able to sneak away. We snuck up there, and somehow God provided a little duplex for us to live in. Still not quite sure how, but he did. So that's where we were going to live. And then came the day for us to move from Florida to Kentucky. And I still have yet to find a job. And we were going to move knowing that we could afford about 40% of our expenses, and that was it. And so here, Ashley and I, with our small child, Chelsea, she was very young at the time, we're going to move halfway across the country, having no idea how in the world we were going to pay the bills, but we were going to figure it out. And we were trusting that God would provide a way. Sure enough, about 3 weeks or so into living there, I found a position at a church there. But that move, as I look back on it, was a little scary. And to some, it might have seemed absurd. Or, why would you do that? That makes no sense. And I wonder if you have a story like that somewhere in your life, where you moved not really knowing what the future was, or you did something that seemed a little bit odd to others, or an account would be like, what are you thinking? That doesn't make any sense. But that's what we did. It was this absurd thing that we just felt like we needed to do, not knowing if we actually could, but we were going to find a way. We pray. Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be pleasing to you, God. May you open us up so that we're willing to receive whatever it is that you would have for us this morning. So today's topic, I think, impacts every single person in this room, either currently, or it did at one time, or it will sometime in the future, I promise. And so to get there, I wonder, I ask you a question, and this requires just a little bit of participation. I wonder if you are currently or have ever experienced a moment in your life where you were so filled with stress and anxiety that you had no idea how you were going to make it. Maybe you couldn't sleep, maybe you couldn't eat, or maybe you ate too much. But has anybody here, raise your hand, if you've ever experienced a level of anxiety and stress that causes you to not sleep, to overeat, or not eat, or you're overwhelmed? See, I think the reality is that every single one of us in this room have experienced that, or are currently experiencing that. I think that the United States particularly, but also Western culture, has made this worse. That we are constantly running and running and running, and there's so much stress and anxiety, and there's so much information out there that it just makes it worse. Which leads me to the thing that we're going to talk about, and that is margins. We're going to talk about margins today. And what I mean by margins, at its very basic definition, is this. Margins are the difference between what you have and what you need. Simply put, if I had $100 and I had $80 worth of bills, my margin is what? $20. I have a $20 margin. It's the difference between what you have and what you need. And I think margins, the lack of margins, impact us so deeply. And there are two particular kind of people when it comes to margins. There's the first one, which is really bad today, although maybe it hasn't been forever, but it's very bad today, is that we're constantly running at full speed. There's always more to be done. There's always more to accomplish. More people need me. I've got to do this. I've got to do that. And then at the end of the day, you have nothing left. It might look like a person who goes to work, and work is so demanding emotionally, and physically, and mentally, that when you get home, you have nothing left for your family because you've spent it all at work. It might look like, for some of us with younger children, signing our kids up for every single activity all week long because we don't want to deprive them of an opportunity. But then before we know it, we're signed up for activities 6 nights a week, maybe 7, and we never have family time, and we never get home, and our kids never learn the healthiness of margins because we ourselves don't have them. And so we're constantly running and running and running. The other way would be the emotional side. So that was more time, maybe mentally exhausted, but the emotional side, if you are emotionally stretched thin because you're going and going and going, then when somebody comes to you, maybe someone in your family comes to you, and they have something they need to share with you, even if it's small, but they need to share it with you, you just can't handle it. So you explode on them, and you say things you don't mean, and you cause damage because emotionally you're strung too thin. Bilbo Baggins in Lord of the Rings makes a statement, something like, I feel stretched thin, like butter on toast. I feel this tension, it's just pulling. And oftentimes we find ourselves in that. That first person probably looks at Facebook in the morning and at night, first thing in the morning, last thing at night, makes very little downtime. They just always are doing something. The second group of people who really struggle with margin aren't the people who don't have margin. Because that first group, they don't have any margin. There's no margin in their life at all. The second group, they have a lot of margin. They have a lot of margin. They may be at a stage in their life where they have a lot of downtime. And in that group, I really see two things. I see one, the person who feels like they've worked their whole life, and they've worked so hard that now they have this margin, and it's mine. And I don't want to give it to anything or anybody else because I deserve it. The other person in that category that has a lot of margin in their life is the person who might think that their margin isn't really desired by anybody. That maybe they believe at this phase in their life that the world has kind of moved past them and has sort of forgotten them, or they think that their skills aren't necessarily desired or wanted, or that they don't have anything to offer. Both parties here, the one who runs all the time and has no margins, and the party that has tons of arguments but never uses them, both of them are sorely mistaken. And they're missing something far bigger. And I think that if we don't understand a healthy balance of margins and what they're for, that I think it has the potential to continue to harm and destroy our personal relationships, our ability to serve and care for others. It has the potential to continue to isolate us from others because we hoard it, or it continues to threaten our own stability because we think that no one wants our money. So we're going to kind of look at that today, starting in Leviticus 19, which was read already. What we see in Leviticus 19 is to leave the corners of the field for the poor and the foreigner. Not to pick up what's behind you. Let it drop and someone else can have it. There's an old Jewish saying, which is a little after this was written, but I still think it applies, is that if you picture a square field of some sorts, you can tell how generous a person is by how big their circle is. Because if you leave the corners, it makes a circle. And if you make a circle, the smaller your circle, the more generous you are. The larger your circle, the less generous you are. That's how the saying goes. I think it gives a good picture, maybe not everything, but it gives a pretty good picture. Now this Levitical law was in the second portion of Leviticus. The first portion is very much laws about how you interact with God, what life is like in the temple when you go, and how you make things right. The second half of Leviticus is very much about our relationship with other people, making things right. How do we interact with each other? And that's where this piece is found. And so, later on down the road, at the time of Judges, there's this story that some of you might be familiar with. It's from the book of Ruth. To give you a little background so that you know where we are. In the book of Ruth, we discover that there's a woman named Naomi. And her and her husband have two boys. The boys marry two ladies. And unfortunately, the husband and the two boys all die, which leaves Naomi, Ruth, and the other woman alone. And so there's a decision that has to be made. Naomi tries to tell the two, you can tell Ruth, that you can leave, you don't need to stay. In fact, I think she's trying to push them away because she knows that life for women in this situation, in that time period, was not pleasant. And it was not generous. It was very difficult. But Ruth decided to stay. She told Naomi, no, I'm going to stay with you. This may not be my land. However, I'm going to stay. I'm committed and we're going to stay. And so together, Naomi and Ruth stay together and they have to figure out how to survive. Really, how to even eat. Most basic things. And so in Ruth chapter 2, we see these couple verses. It said, and Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor. Naomi said to her, go ahead, my daughter. So she went out, entered a field, and began to glean behind harvesters. You see, what's happening is that Naomi and Ruth are in need of food, and so Ruth goes to one of these fields that's following the Leviticus law here about not harvesting the corners, about leaving what falls behind. And Ruth goes, and she starts harvesting food for her and Naomi from this field. They get to eat because of it. And we find out later that this field is actually owned by Boaz, and Boaz was faithful in following this thing that God had commanded. So often when we grow our own harvest or we work hard for something, it's ours and we hold tight to it. And we don't want to give up any of it. The absurd thing would be to leave the edges just in case somebody needs it. And that's what Boaz does. He leaves the edges, he allows to pick up from behind. Because that's the law. And he's going to be faithful to that. And then why this matters for you and I, it gets very personal, and this is why. Because Boaz, we find out later, marries Ruth. And they have a son. And that son becomes the grandfather of David. So Ruth and Boaz are the great-grandparents of King David. And if you know your history, you might also know that Jesus comes from the line of King David. So Jesus Christ, our very Lord and Savior, comes from the line of David, which comes from the line of Ruth and Boaz. The faithfulness and the willingness to do something that seems absurd by Boaz pays off for all of us. I wonder what would happen if Boaz hadn't done that. I wonder how different history would be. And then there's one more story I want to take you to, and you may be a little confused as to why I'm taking you there first, but hang with me, and I think that I'll bring you along as we get to the end of it, okay? In Luke chapter 5, this is early on in Jesus' ministry. It says, once Jesus was standing on the shore of Lake Gennesaret, which is also the Sea of Galilee, the crowd was pushing in on him to better hear the word of God. I think it's interesting that they were pushing in to better hear the word of God. Often we think of the word of God as this, which is accurate, but this is the literal word of God because Jesus is speaking. So it's literally coming out of Jesus' mouth. And they all want to hear it. It matters. They're trying to get there to hear it. Jesus noticed 2 boats tied up. The fishermen had just left them and were out scrubbing their nets. He climbed into the boat that was Simon's and asked him to put out a little from the shore. Sitting there, using the boat for a pulpit, he taught the crowd. Jesus understands that this crowd is getting larger and they need to hear him. And he also understands that if he gets back onto that boat and out on the lake just a little bit, the natural environment will amplify his voice so they can hear him better. Now just imagine Simon Peter, and he was probably with Andrew, James, and John, based off other Gospels. But imagine Simon Peter here. He's exhausted, he's tired because he's been fishing all night, he's cleaning the nets. Just imagine when you get off work and you're exhausted and you just want to go home. And then the boss asks you to do something 5 minutes before you're supposed to leave, right? This is what it's like. They want to leave, they're tired, they're cleaning the nets. He's probably watching what's happening. But he's also cleaning the nets to go home. And then Jesus doesn't ask first. Instead, Jesus steps into the boat and then asks Simon Peter to send him out just to go out just a little bit into the water. It's like, how does Simon say no to Jesus when Jesus already stepped in the boat? It'd be like you sitting in a parking lot and Jesus gets in your car and says, take me to Target. Like, how do you say no to that? So Simon Peter is put in this position where he may not know fully everything about Jesus, but he must have at least heard a little bit. And he must have at least known that this person, this Jesus, was a rabbi and some important teacher. And so, put in the position, unable to say no, Simon gets in the boat and they push out just a little bit. And then Jesus teaches the crowd from there. And then there's a shift. Here's where it goes. When Jesus finished teaching, he said to Simon, push out into deep water and let your nets out for a catch. Simon said, Master, we've been fishing hard all night and haven't caught even a minnow. That little saying there by Simon, Master, we've been fishing all night and we haven't even caught a minnow. When you exegete that and you study the language and pull it apart and try to figure out deep down what is Simon actually saying, this is what it means. Simon is saying, stay in your lane, bro. Ultimately, Simon is saying, we're the fishermen, we're the experienced ones, we are the ones with the knowledge, we know what to do. Like, you're a teacher, and we appreciate that, and that matters, but this is our area, and we know our area. You don't fish in the day, you fish at night, because the fish are up in shallow water, and it works better for net fishing, because during the day it gets too hot, and the fish go deeper. So you don't fish during the day. We know this. Stay in your lane, Jesus. But then Simon Peter goes on to say, but if you say so, I'll let out the nets. But if you say so. They end up going out, letting out the nets, and bringing a huge amount of fish in, so much that it's swamping boats. But did you see what happened? Jesus asked Simon to do something that didn't make sense. Something that seemed counterproductive. Something that we would call absurd. Moving to Kentucky and not knowing that you could actually pay 60% of your bills. But if you say so. The thing about margins is margins don't really make sense, honestly. Especially when you're in a hurry. When you have a huge to-do list, and you have all these things you have to do, and you want me to what? You want me to make margin in my life? You want me to set aside time just to be me and not worry about accomplishing things? That seems counterproductive. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to leave a corner of your fields for other people when you've worked hard and you deserve it. This seems counterproductive and it doesn't make sense. But if you say so. You see, margins in our life, whether they're about time or emotional margins, or mental margins, whatever they might be, margins in our life, yes, make us healthier as individuals, true. But it's more than just about us. It doesn't stop there. It's also about the others. If you don't have margins in your life, you can't help other people because you yourself are a wreck. If you don't have margins in your life, then how are you actually trusting Jesus? Because when you say, I have a to-do list and I have to do it all, and it's all on me, and it's all about me, and I've got to do this, there's little room for Jesus. Because it's just about me. See, the thing about margins is I think they reflect very directly the greatest commandments. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. You, others, and Jesus. All three of them are deeply connected, and you cannot separate them. Margins matter for others. Yes, for you, but also for others, and also for trusting Jesus. For the person who struggles with this, that you're busy all the time, I am one of them. Here's what I'd say. Maybe you need to start by scheduling your margins. Actually putting it in your calendar and blocking out time just to be. No tasks, nothing accomplished. Maybe it's prayer time, maybe it's reading time, maybe it's not. But it's something to remind you that there's more to you than just your accomplishments. That there's time for you just to be. Because then you'll refuel. You'll refuel your physical, emotional, psychological health. So that you can be more present for others. You don't have to apologize for this. You don't have to explain it to others. Just schedule it. Personally, I think that's spiritual discipline that needs to be practiced more often. The other, for the person who constantly is moving all the time, the other thing I would say is this. You need to learn the word no. We need to learn the word no, and we're not very good at it. The reality is we like to please other people. We want to accomplish things. We want to work hard. None of that's bad. But if you can't say no, and you say yes to everything, I promise you, you're saying no to something else. But when you say yes to this, there's a no somewhere else, even if you don't know it. Be more selective about your yeses, and don't be afraid to say no. That is acceptable and okay. To the person who has lots of margins, and you don't know what to do with them. First, the one who thinks they will hold on to them, you can do that. You can hold on to all of your time, and all of your resources, and all of your margins. But I think what you're going to find is you're going to find that you've isolated yourself. You're going to find that you've isolated yourself, and you're also going to discover that ultimately there's not much of a legacy you continue after. give the margin away a little bit. Just a little. To the person who has lots of margins, but feels like nobody wants them, that maybe the world has left you behind, the thing that I can promise you is this, is that no matter what stage in life you are in, that the world still needs you. That we still need you, we still need your experiences, we still need your personality and your thoughts and your laughter. We still need you, no matter where you're at in your stage of life. So for you, I would say, sign up for something. Just find something to sign up for and see what happens. The first time or two may be a rough go, but eventually I think you'll discover that the world still desires your time and your heart and your efforts. Give it a try. Work with teenagers. They're not that scary. Got one last thing I want to leave with you all before we wrap it up. In Genesis, there's one little verse that you almost wonder why it's even in there. It's about Abraham. And Abraham, in case you aren't aware, is older in age, past the age that you should expect children. But God promises Abraham that you will have a child. In fact, your descendants will be as numerous as the grains of sand, as the stars in the sky. And not only will your descendants be numerous, but this will be your land. So the verse I'm going to read to you is after he's had his child and everything seems to be smoothing out, sort of towards the later years of his life. And this is what it says, Genesis chapter 21. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree at Beersheba and worshipped God there. Praying to the eternal God, Abraham lived in Philistine country for a long time. Abraham planted the tamarisk tree. There's two thoughts about this. The first is that it was to mark some special occasion or event or covenant, but there's a well there that I think they did that with. So for me, the scholars think there's another one which makes more sense to me personally. And that is this, that a tamarisk tree or trees, if it was a field, they do not grow quickly. They take a while to grow. So Abraham plants a tree that he's never going to reap the benefits from. Much like this tree here, shade in that area is very valuable. And these trees will provide valuable shade, but Abraham will never get to see it. You see, the thing is that Abraham was faithful to God and faithful in believing God's promises, and Abraham planted a tree anyways, believing that maybe his descendants would be there. You see, margin in your life may seem counterproductive and it may seem absurd. Planting a tree that you'll never reap the benefits from seems a little absurd. But it's about more than just you. It's about you, yes, but it's about others and it's about trusting Jesus. But if you say so, I will. Pray with me. Gracious God, so many of us in here struggle with feeling spread thin. There's not enough time. There's not enough of me to go around. We feel that way all the time, God. We put pressure on ourselves. We create stress and anxiety that we don't know how to deal with. Some of us here, we have margin, but we're afraid to give it away. Others have margin, but we're concerned that people don't want it, God. May you push us this week. May you challenge each of us to consider the areas where we need to trust you more with margin, or the areas that maybe we actually need to make margin in the first place to trust you with more. God, I pray that you would convict us and challenge us, because this is about us, this is about others, and this is about trusting you. So in Jesus' name I pray.